Let's go Dolphins! I have a feeling that one of the biggest stories developing inside the Miami Dolphins right now isn't the one most fans are paying attention to. Because while everyone is waiting for training camp to begin, debating starters and predicting breakout players, the coaching staff is quietly revealing something extremely important through their comments and their actions. And the more I listen to what these coaches are saying, the more convinced I become that several players are much closer to making a real impact than people realize. We're talking about players earning praise for their work ethic, players gaining confidence, players embracing competition, and players who seem determined to prove that they belong. But here's what really grabbed my attention. The coaches aren't just talking about talent. They're talking about hunger. And in my experience, hunger is often what separates good players from the ones who end up surprising everybody. Before we dive into everything, make sure you've already hit that like button if you believe the Miami Dolphins have future stars on this roster that nobody is talking about yet. And today I want to hear from the most optimistic Dolphins fans watching. Drop this comment below right now. Go Dolphins! The next breakout star is already on this roster. Let's fill the comments section with positivity and show some support for the players grinding through these off-season practices. Now, my personal opinion is very simple. I love hearing coaches talk about development instead of hype. Anyone can look good in a highlight clip. But when coaches consistently praise effort, confidence, improvement, and attention to detail, that's usually where real progress starts. And based on everything we're hearing from OTA practices, there are a few Dolphins players who may be building serious momentum before training camp even begins. And one of them might end up becoming a name every Dolphins fan is talking about very soon. Let's get into it. Let's fill the comments section with positivity and support for the players putting in the work during these off-season sessions. Now, my personal opinion is simple. I think one of the most encouraging things happening right now isn't necessarily a specific play or highlight. It's the attitude. When coaches repeatedly talk about effort, development, confidence, and players trying to improve weaknesses in their game, that's exactly what you want to hear in June. Nobody wins games during OTA practices, but players can absolutely build momentum. And from everything we're hearing, there are several Dolphins players doing exactly that. What immediately stood out from the latest OTA discussions was the praise being directed towards some of the younger players on the roster. And honestly, these weren't the typical coach speak comments that we hear every offseason. These comments were focused on specific traits, specific improvements, specific mindsets. One of the most interesting examples came when Bobby Slowick discussed first-round offensive lineman Caden Proctor. The thing that jumped off the page wasn't his size. Everyone already knows he's a massive human being. What stood out was the way Slowick described his mentality. According to the coach, Proctor doesn't simply want to be good. He wants to be great. Think about that for a second. There's a huge difference between players who are satisfied with making a roster and players who are chasing greatness. And while Slowick made it clear that there is still a long way to go regarding fundamentals, technique, hand placement, footwork, and overall development, he also emphasized that when Proctor does things correctly, you can see the power immediately. You can see why the Dolphins invested in him. That's the part that should excite Dolphins fans. Not because anyone should expect perfection right away, but because the raw tools appear to be there. The hunger appears to be there, and the coaching staff clearly sees something worth developing. But Proctor wasn't the only player receiving attention. Another name that continues generating positive comments is Juju Brents, and the description of Brents may have been one of the most fascinating observations from the entire OTA period. The coaching staff highlighted his rare combination of size and movement skills. A player with the frame of a bigger defender but the movement ability typically associated with smaller athletes. They pointed toward his physicality, his willingness to play against the run, and his ability to move effectively despite his size. Now, if you've been following the offseason closely, you've probably noticed that Brents keeps appearing in conversations. And that isn't happening by accident. Because every time coaches discuss him, there seems to be genuine excitement about what he could potentially become. Then there's another player whose situation might be even more important. Jonah Savaiania. According to the comments coming from the coaching staff, moving back to the right side appears to have created an immediate comfort level for him. The transition wasn't viewed as a major struggle. In fact, the feeling seemed to return rather quickly. Coaches emphasized the amount of work he has put into improving and expressed confidence in where he currently stands. And that's a storyline worth watching, because offensive line development often determines far more than fans realize. Quarterbacks benefit from it. Running backs benefit from it. Receivers benefit from it. Everything starts up front. Speaking of running backs, another fascinating topic emerging from OTA practices revolves around Ollie Gordon. And if the coaching staff is right, Dolphins fans may soon discover exactly why he's attracting attention. Slowick described him as a runner who doesn't just possess size. He runs with size. There's a difference. According to the comments, when pads eventually come on, people are going to feel his physical style. Coaches specifically talked about the energy a physical runner can create for an offensive line and how that physicality becomes contagious throughout an offense. But perhaps the most encouraging part wasn't even about running the football. It was about growth. Because coaches highlighted Gordon's efforts to expand his game beyond simply being a downhill runner. They're seeing him work on pass protection, work on receiving responsibilities, and develop skills that could allow him to stay on the field in more situations. And that's exactly what players must do if they want larger roles. Versatility creates opportunity. The more things you can do, the harder it becomes for coaches to take you off the field. Then there is Jaylen Wright, and the comments surrounding him might be some of the most important of all. Because according to Slowick, confidence is making a difference. The more comfortable Wright becomes, the more his speed and explosiveness begin showing up. Coaches are seeing a player whose natural ability becomes increasingly visible as his understanding of the offense grows. That's a significant observation. Because confidence can completely change a player's trajectory. Sometimes talent isn't the issue. Sometimes comfort is the issue. Sometimes understanding exactly where you're supposed to be allows your athletic ability to finally take over. And if that's what's happening with Wright, Dolphins fans should be paying very close attention. Because one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The coaching staff isn't simply evaluating players. They're developing them. They're identifying weaknesses. They're building confidence. They're teaching fundamentals, and they're creating opportunities for players to earn larger roles. What made the linebacker segment so interesting wasn't necessarily the drills themselves. It was the coaching. Because for the first time, Dolphins fans got a closer look at how the new staff is teaching fundamentals, correcting mistakes, and building habits during practice. And honestly, if you're someone who enjoys understanding football beyond the final score, this was fascinating. Throughout the session, linebackers coach Al Washington could be heard constantly emphasizing details. Eyes, leverage, hand placement, block shedding, body positioning, fundamentals. Again and again. Over and over. Now some fans might watch those drills and think they're boring. No touchdowns. No spectacular catches. No highlight reel interceptions. But coaches know something important. Championship-level football is usually built on boring details. The little things. The things fans rarely notice during games. The things that determine whether a player makes a tackle or misses one. The things that determine whether a runner gains 3 yards or 30. And that's exactly what seemed to be happening throughout these sessions. Players weren't simply going through the motions. They were being coached aggressively. Every movement mattered. Every rep mattered. Every correction mattered. But there was another detail that really caught attention. A certain name kept coming up repeatedly during the linebacker drills. Jacob Rodriguez. Again and again, coaches were calling out his name. Again and again, there were corrections, praise, instructions, coaching points. And while fans don't have access to every practice rep, that's the kind of thing worth paying attention to. Because sometimes the most important